The gift of dreaming has meant more to me than my talent for assimilating conscious knowledge. I have spent a third of my life dreaming, and that third is by no means the worst. Albert Einstein. On page 318 of this book, the author makes the assumption that people capable of conscious guided dreams are the first representatives of the next stage of Homo sapiens evolution. Because for more than 80% of the world's population, such dreams are not something natural. You might think that not all books are equally useful, but only this is a worldwide bestseller written by a professor of neurobiology who has spent more than 20 years studying sleep. Here he cites the most up-to-date research. And you can find this book not in the popular psychology department, but in the medical department. Have you ever controlled your dreams? Do you know what it's like? After all, for most people, sleep is not something that happens easily and effortlessly. Some of you have probably invited people who can fall asleep for an hour at lunchtime like nothing happened. But as the saying goes, those who are unhappy and those who don't sleep well used to be proud of it. The Conjecture of Matthew Walker, that is the name of the author of the book, about a new kind of man may be an exaggeration. But there is one genius who has had the experience of conscious dreams, whom the language will not turn to call an ordinary man. Meet Richard Feynman. He's so cool that when he was only 25 years old, the United States government called him to the Manhattan Project to make an atomic bomb. And that's not his only merit, to say the least. He knew how to crack safes, played the drums brilliantly, painted magnificent pictures, and dreamed of visiting Tuva. And when he got the call at 4 a.m. to announce that he had won the Nobel Prize in physics, he said he was asleep and hung up. Yes, he liked to sleep, like everyone else. But he loved puzzles even more. Sleep and puzzles. You'll soon find out how related they are. Ever since Feynman was a child, he considered sleep his unsolved problem. Because when he was a child, his father gave him a puzzle like this. Suppose Martians come to Earth, and these Martians don't know what sleep is. They're always awake. They don't know this ridiculous phenomenon that we call sleep, and they ask you questions. What does a creature who falls asleep feel? What happens to you when you fall into sleep? Does your thinking stop, or does your thought process become slower and slower? How does unconsciousness really happen? Probably everyone in childhood tried to catch that very moment of falling asleep. And in the morning, you couldn't remember that moment or the thought you fell asleep on. Being already a student, Feynman decided to find an answer to his father's problem. How exactly the stream of consciousness ends when a person falls asleep. He lowered the curtains in his room, turned off the light, and went to bed, trying to figure out what exactly happens to him in the moments before sleep. The first thing he noticed was all sorts of side effects. For example, that he kept thinking, having silent conversations with himself. Along with this, various visual images flashed on and off in the darkness on the back of his eyelids. And at one point, something unnatural happened. Feynman noticed that, being on the edge of sleep and wakefulness, he was able to think about two things in parallel. Amazing, isn't it? But it's absolutely impossible to utilize this somehow, because these are wandering thoughts that have arisen in your head beyond your will. And as soon as you notice that you're thinking about two things right now, that process is immediately interrupted. Feynman says that when you fall asleep, the thoughts continue to run their course, but become less and less logically connected. Interestingly, you don't notice this lack of logical connection at all until you ask yourself, what made me think of that? Trying hard to trace the origins of this thought, you cannot remember anything, and then suddenly realize that you have forgotten the thought you wanted to trace the path to. That is, you have an illusion of logical connection till the last, despite the fact that thoughts become more and more absurd. In the end, when the connection between thoughts is lost completely, that's when you fall asleep. Do you remember how you got here? One day, while once again watching himself fall asleep, Feynman realized that he had fallen asleep and was beginning to dream, and that he was continuing to watch it. He was not seeing some black and white dream. but a vividly colored dream that he could control. That's when his nocturnal experiments began. The conscious, lush dreams that Feynman saw were also very accurate. If he dreamed of a red-haired girl in the grass, he could see every hair on her head with the accompanying physical effects like refraction of sunlight. Of course, not all of his dreams were manageable or realistic. Like everyone else, sometimes he dreamed something absurd and metaphorical. For example, 3 billiard balls of different colors, one of which did not want to go into the hole. These balls, as Feynman woke up and realized, represented 3 girls he liked, and one of whom had gone abroad. For a long time, studying his dreams, Feynman, making worthy attempts, still could not comprehend their mystery and purpose. The video may seem strange to you because in it we're not going to talk about sleep in general as a phenomenon. And in fact, not even about conscious dreams, but about the psychosis that happens to you every night. Last night you had a terrible psychosis, and this night it will happen again. And before you dismiss your diagnosis, Matthew Walker has 5 compelling pieces of evidence. First, when you dreamed last night, you saw something that wasn't really there. It's called a hallucination. Second, you believed something that couldn't really be true. Third, you were confused about time, place, and identity. That is, you were disoriented. Fourth, you had radical swings of emotion, or as psychiatrists say, you were emotionally labile. Fifth, when you woke up in the morning, you had forgotten most, if not all, of what happened in the dream. You had amnesia. Imagine if all this had happened while you were awake. You'd be in an ambulance immediately. However, for reasons that are only now becoming clear, the brain state called the rapid eye movement sleep and dreaming phase, that is, the mental experience that accompanies this phase, is a completely normal biological and psychological process. Not only normal, but also extremely important. As we will soon see, one of the main functions of sleep is the raising of immune barriers, the defense against viral threats from the outside world, a task it does brilliantly well. But can we say that dreams themselves do something similar? Remember how in Christopher Nolan's movie Inception, the human subconscious defended itself against the attempts of outsiders to extract information in dreams. There, you could even train projections of your subconscious and make them professional assassins to protect your own secrets more effectively. If someday the same kind of co-sleeping technology as in the movie is invented, many people will need similar protection. On the other hand, I doubt we'll ever need to get inside someone's head to learn their secrets. Considering that all the secrets in every detail, all the secrets that no one should ever know, and tons of classified information not meant for prying eyes that we've already forgotten about ourselves. It's all stored on electronic devices and on the internet right now. It is necessary for you to realize that not Philistines at all, but real researchers put into the concept of dreaming. In fact, it is the same thing that everyone does. As is commonly known, sleep has 2 phases, REM sleep and non-REM sleep. These phases alternate while we sleep, and some mental pictures visit us in each of these phases. But the most hallucinogenic, emotional, and bizarre experiences with rich content come from REM sleep. These are what most researchers consider to be true dreams. At the time Feynman was observing his dreams, the process of waking up scared him a lot. He said that at the moment of awakening there was a moment in which you feel paralyzed. You feel like you're unable to wake up and move. You all know what it is, and that this phenomenon is called sleep paralysis. But think about what it is. In the waking state, even when you are lying in bed and you think you are completely relaxed, there is still some degree of general tension or tone in your muscles. This steady muscle humming can be easily detected if we connect special sensors to the body. When you enter the non-REM sleep, some of this muscle tension disappears, but a significant portion remains. However, when the brain prepares to move into REM sleep, an impressive change occurs. Literally seconds before the dreaming phase begins, you find yourself completely paralyzed. The muscles in your body have no tone whatsoever, and your body collapses like a rag doll, while your involuntary muscles, and those that control instinctive contractions, such as breathing and heartbeat, continue to function and keep you alive during sleep. All other muscles relax. Try to move with an effort of will during sleep paralysis, and you will realize who is the boss of the house. This condition is caused by a powerful blocking signal that is transmitted from the oldest part of the brain stem, along the entire length of the spinal cord. Once this signal is transmitted, the postural muscles of the body, such as the biceps and quadriceps muscles of the legs, lose all tension and strength. They no longer respond to your brain's commands. In essence, you become a prisoner of REM sleep. You are roughly aware of how you are lying down. You can control your breathing and eye movements, and you may even think you are able to move your arm, for example. But the transition from thought to movement takes an infinitely long time. As soon as the REM phase of sleep ends, your body is immediately released from its physical captivity. The irony is that during the dreaming phase, while your body is completely still, your brain, on the other hand, becomes highly active as if you were awake. And by blocking muscle activity, your brain prevents you from doing in real life what you do in dreams. During REM sleep, a flurry of motor commands generated by dynamic dreaming rushes through the brain. In such a case, it is very wise of nature to sew a physiological straitjacket. You see, the brain has a whole system that blocks our movement during sleep. Isn't that the first proof that we need dreams for something? But for what? Many have tried to unravel the nature of dreams. Dreams have been attributed both divine origin and predictive power. Some believe that they were a reflection of recent events. Sigmund Freud founded a whole method of dream interpretation. He believed that dreams are generated by unsatisfied unconscious desires, and these desires are so shocking that the brain has to metaphorize them, because otherwise, seeing his bare essence in a dream, a person would inevitably wake up in horror. All of this is, of course, completely absurd, but don't blame Freud. He is only a man of his time. We too are a man of our time, and we have MRI scans. MRI scans show us that the part of the brain responsible for orderly logical thinking is shut down during REM sleep. That is, the part that sends instructions to the emotional centers deep in the brain. And at the same time, visual, emotional, and motor centers, as well as the department of autobiographical memory, are sharply activated. And it would seem that since the autobiographical memory section of the brain, including the hippocampus, is so active during REM sleep, one would expect dreams to contain a person's recent memories, what Freud described as the sediment of the day. Having conducted an experiment on the degree to which dreams correspond to our recent impressions, the sludge of the day was found only 1 to 2% of the time. Thus, it is safe to say that dreams are not a complete reproduction of the events of our lives. We are not reproducing a videotape of the day's experiences on a large screen of the cerebral cortex. If there is a certain sludge of the day, it is only a few drops in the general flow of unintelligible dreams. However, there was something really common, penetrating from reality to dreams. It was the emotions I experienced. It was emotional memories, up to 55% of the emotional themes and experiences that the participants of the experiment had experienced while awake, unambiguously manifested themselves in night visions. And this commonality was clear not only to the experts who conducted the experiment, but also to the participants themselves. If there is one thing that runs through our daily life and our dreams, it is experience. Contrary to Freud's assumption, we see that there is no internal censor. The sources of dreams are transparent, clear enough for anyone to identify and realize them without an outside interpreter. And this is the first key to understanding what the function of dreams is. After all, it has long been thought that dreams are simply a side effect of the REM sleep. Like heat radiation from an electric light bulb, it is a side effect of light that has no function of its own. After all, no one uses light bulbs as heaters. So, dreams have three main functions, what we might call the dream triangle. Each function is related to the other two. The first one, If you are going through a misfortune in your life, you may have heard the phrase, "time heals." What you are unlikely to have heard is that it is not time that heals, it is dreaming with dreams. We all know that you can't make serious decisions at night, that the morning is wiser than the evening, and that you should sleep with any idea first. There's a reason for all this. Everyone felt it. In the morning, yesterday's oppressive events no longer seem so terrible. That's because REM sleep is the only time in the day when a person stops producing norepinephrine, a key chemical associated with stress. The brain during REM sleep processes depressing memories and themes in this neurochemically calm, safe environment. Think back to something horrible that happened to you 10 years ago. Notice now that these memories do not evoke the emotions that encompassed you at the time of the experience. You haven't forgotten anything, but the emotional component is gone from your memories. At least a significant part of it. You can remember in detail what happened, but you cannot bring back the emotions experienced at that moment. It's a credit to REM sleep with dreams. It is he who separates the bitter emotional peel from the information-rich fruit. This is also confirmed by the fact that in a person after severe stress, there is an increase in the phase of REM sleep. You will say, what does this have to do with dreams? Stress hormones are reduced, and the brain somehow reorganizes itself. But what does this have to do with the movies that we see at night? The fact is that according to studies, only those patients with depression who dreamed about the events after a year were able to completely get rid of stress and recover. Other patients whose dreams did not reflect the harrowing experience were unable to detach themselves from the sad experience and remain depressed. Some combatants with a delicate mental organization, having seen blood and dismemberment, get post-traumatic stress disorder, abbreviated as PTSD. The first main symptom of PTSD is the highest anxiety, just fear of life, and the second is constant, years-long nightmares. The nightmares are so terrible that the unfortunate person is sometimes even afraid to go to sleep. And all because during REM sleep in PTSD patients, the mechanism of production of stress hormones is disturbed. The essence is this: the brain, according to the standard program, every night makes an attempt to look at the traumatic situation impartially, separating the emotional coloring of the event from the event itself, and produces what happened in a dream. But in a person with PTSD, during REM sleep, stress hormone production does not stop, and healing does not occur. The person is terrified during the day, and at night, the system designed to cure such things makes things worse. Second, take a look. If you know any of the people in these horrible quality photos, there is a better than 50% chance that you will realize who it is. Our brains are simply monsters at being able to recognize faces and their expressions. The more familiar a person is to us, the easier it is for our brains to recognize them in a crowd or from afar. This is a critical evolutionary mechanism driven by the need to distinguish between enemies and friends and understand their intentions. We almost unmistakably and bypassing consciousness reads explicit and hidden mimic signals and determine by them the emotional state of fellow human beings. But it is worth depriving a person of dreams during REM sleep, and he will not be able to accurately decipher facial expressions. Moreover, a person can start mistaking friends for enemies, not literally, but at the level of emotions, because it is the REM sleep at night that recalibrates the parts of the brain that are responsible for recognizing faces. All of us sometimes remember dreaming about people's faces. Perhaps this is what a conscious reflection of this process looks like. Experiments show that the better a person had the quality of REM sleep during the night, the more accurately his brain copes with deciphering emotions the next day. At the same time, when the same volunteers were deprived of REM sleep, they stopped distinguishing the nuances of emotional states. And while before they could clearly see the difference between kind and angry faces, now their brains were in a state of constant hypersensitivity and were unable to pick up the nuances of emotional signals from the outside world. Gone was the ability to correctly read facial expression cues on another person's face. Sleep-deprived volunteers began to make mistakes, perceiving even positive facial expressions as negative. Why exactly as negative? When the brain is unable to recognize the intentions on another person's face, it begins to perceive the subject as a threat, just in case. Third and most unexpected. If humanity could survive without the phase of REM sleep, and we deprived it of this phase, then we would not have made any great discoveries requiring hard work of thinking in the future. Without this third function of sleep, we would not have known Galileo or Newton, and there would be no Einstein's theory of relativity. The founding fathers would not have spawned quantum mechanics. There would be no complex discoveries at the tip of a pen. Our most meaningful and logically sound scientific theories are a credit to the nonsense we dream of. Dreams are so absurd for a reason. During sleep, the details of your memories merge and jumble together, eventually presenting us in dreams with their unexpectedly new abstract vision of the situations we experienced. During dreams, our brain analyzes impressive layers of acquired knowledge, and then, combining units of information, extracts some generalizations from the experience, revealing their essence. We wake up with an already much more organized web of reason, which is able to offer amazing solutions to previously unsolvable problems. Mendeleev is a surname known to any even slightly educated person anywhere in the world. Mendeleev's periodic system of elements is the most popular and best illustration of the ability of dreams to systematize existing knowledge, because a dream seen by a scientist led to its creation. Everyone is aware of this story, but just in case, I'll remind you. Mendeleev, Russian chemist, was simply obsessed with the desire to find a pattern in the properties of already known chemical elements. Having written down the chemical and physical properties of all known elements on separate cards, the scientist, maniacally at home, in his study, and in his travels an infinite number of times laid out his solitaire, which could not be solved in any way, trying to deduce the law that would explain how to put this picture together. For years, trying to solve this riddle, he failed. But on February 17, 1869, in a dream, something happened that he had never been able to do in real life. The dream shuffled all the chemical elements swirling in Mendeleev's head, and in a moment of creative insight, arranged them on a grid in which each row, period, and each column, group, took a position according to the atomic characteristics of each element. Here is what Mendeleev himself said about it. I saw in a dream a table in which all the elements took their place. When I woke up, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper, and later only one place required correction. Of course, not everyone believes that, having fallen asleep, Mendeleev saw the finished solution of the periodic system in its entirety and in all its details. But no one doubts that the composition of the table appeared to the scientist in a dream. And this is not the only example of nocturnal revelation. Perhaps the most famous example of nocturnal inspiration is the story of Samuel Coleridge, who, in 1816, awoke from a drug-induced sleep with a finished poem of 300 lines. He began to write it down, but he was interrupted by a visitor who had been with him for at least an hour. When Coleridge took up the poem again, he could only recall parts of the text that had appeared so vividly before him in a dream. That is why the last stanzas of the masterpiece, Kubla Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, seem incoherent. Almost 150 years later, Paul McCartney woke up in his girlfriend's house and realized that a melody was playing in his head. He rushed to the piano and played the motif to the future hit Yesterday. I dreamed the whole song, McCartney told his biographer. I couldn't believe it. Austrian-German pharmacologist Otto Löwy dreamed up the blueprint for an interesting experiment on 2 frog hearts that would finally show how nerve cells communicate using chemicals that are transmitted by synapses. This dream-inspired discovery by Löwy was later honored with a Nobel Prize. On a summer afternoon in 2003, Stephanie Meyer, an ordinary housewife from suburban Arizona, had to take her children to a swimming lesson. The night before, she had dreamt of a girl talking in a meadow to a vampire of unimaginable beauty, who was fighting the urge to drink her blood. Upon waking up, she immediately wrote down the entire dialogue. This dream was the starting point for the Twilight series of books and their film adaptation, which brought Meyer over $100 million. Of course, these are some pure, absolute examples demonstrating the creative function of dreams. But rest assured, it happens to every person all the time on a smaller scale. You already have the elements in your head to solve a lot of your problems, but those elements may not yet be properly put together and unconnected. The pieces of all sorts of life puzzles are stacked on top of each other from night to night, and you wake up with the ground already prepared to consciously make some kind of discovery. It all sounds beautiful, but what about the science? Do we have any data to support that dreams are a source of creativity? What scientific evidence do we have? In the 1960s, leading psychologists pondered how we managed to find new solutions to problems. To begin with, researchers had to define the concept of creativity. They described it for themselves as the formation of associative elements in new combinations that either fulfill specific requirements or prove useful in some way. The researchers' next task was to see if there was a specific pattern to the formation of new ideas. The psychologists drew a 4-step timeline of our reaction to problems whose solution is not obvious. First, our brains strain and try unsuccessfully to find a solution to the basic elements of the problem. Then we tend to abstract, focusing on other things that require immediate attention. This is followed by a kind of pause where the problem does not occupy our thoughts. Finally, a solution emerges in the form of a sudden insight when we are not thinking about it at all, or are asleep. The most interesting thing happens in the interval between the time we are distracted from the problem and the moment of insight. What is it? Just a stretch of time during which the brain finds a new idea or something more. In the early 1980s, Francis Crick and Graham Mitchison suggested that sleep plays a key role in learning and creativity. These skills are closely linked. They are essential for survival, helping us find sustenance or create a new business product. We intuitively recognize that in sleep, especially during the rapid eye movement phase, our brain is solving some kind of task. During the rapid eye movement phase, we have vivid dreams, and our brain is as active as it is during the waking period. If we don't stay long enough in this stage of sleep one night, our brains will catch up the next night. You don't have to be an expert to realize that, in our minds, this phase is really important. According to Crick and Mitchison's theory, the brain collects countless scraps of information from the day, from the external features of the waiter serving lunch to the color and pattern of a coworker's tie. When we learn something new in the form of a description, like what happened at work last Wednesday, or a process, how to drive a car, the information is filtered in the hippocampus, which is the name for this part of our brain. Putting all the information into long-term memory would be impractical, plus it would slow the brain down when searching for relevant information. The mind selects what it intends to store and use in the future and sifts out unimportant information to make room for the information it will receive the next day. Probably the process of organizing the file cabinet of our memory takes place in sleep during the phase of rapid eye movement. This explains the chaotic nature of our dreams. Flashes of genius occur at night because our minds are cleared, leaving only important information behind. As a result, the brain begins to create chains of logic that it wouldn't have noticed before. This theory is entertaining. However, Crick and Mitchison have never proven it experimentally. Testing a sleeping brain is very difficult because it's asleep. You can't give a sleeping person a test to determine creativity, so you have to do some interesting tricks. Matthew Walker, the author of this book, developed a test that was designed, as far as possible, to solve this problem. There's a phenomenon that almost everybody experiences almost every morning: sleep inertia, the transition of the brain from a sleepy state to a wakeful state. The prefrontal cortex, the area of our brain responsible for decision-making and self-control, is activated not immediately, but gradually, in the first 20 to 30 minutes after waking up. During this time, our memory, reaction time, alertness, and ability to perform complex analytical tasks are reduced. A person is dull and easily out of sorts. And Matthew Walker wondered if this short stretch of sleep inertia could be used to benefit the experiment. To do this, he decided to wake up volunteers at different stages of REM sleep and non-REM sleep by having them solve anagrams. As if anagrams weren't a particularly difficult analytical task for someone who just woke up. To make the experiment more accurate, each word consisted of 5 letters, and the riddle had only one correct solution. Study participants were explained the design of the experiment and put to sleep. The volunteers who fell asleep were awakened 4 times during the night, twice during non-REM sleep, and twice during the REM phase. When the subject was awakened, he or she had to solve anagrams, each of which appeared on the screen for only a few seconds. The volunteer only had to sound out the correct answer. He had one. Each round of testing lasted only 90 seconds. And of course, Matthew Walker recorded how many correct answers each participant in the experience gave. The subjects then went back to sleep. The results were fascinating. Waking up in the phase of non-REM sleep, the subjects did not show much creative enthusiasm and solved only a few riddles with anagrams. But when they were awakened in the phase of REM sleep, that is, in the dreaming phase, the case was different. Problem-solving ability simply increased, and participants solved up to 35% more riddles than in the first case or even during wakefulness. Moreover, after leaving the REM sleep phase, the time to find solutions decreased dramatically. As one of the participants said, the solutions just popped into their heads. Using the same experimental method of awakening, Walker's colleague, a Harvard University scientist, decided to use the example of video games to understand on what principle the brain selects new information, which then appears in dreams. Professor of psychiatry Robert Stickgold, who was then a little over 60, became interested in the topic of sleep after one incident that happened to him when he was in Vermont, a mountainous state in the northeastern United States. At night, as he drifted into sleep, he felt as if he was still on the mountain. Even though he was in a comfortable bed, in his sleep, he felt himself grabbing onto ledges and climbing up. 2 hours later, he woke up, and the sensation was gone. A few days later, he told his colleagues about the strange feeling, as if the mind replayed his day as soon as he fell asleep. Then he learned that this had happened to others as well. Friends told him they felt the same way after doing something difficult that required concentration, like rafting down a raging river or studying organic chemistry for a long time. We're talking Harvard professors after all. Stickgold wanted to do a study to see if this was a common phenomenon, but got stuck on choosing the format of the experiment. He couldn't take a group to Vermont and have them climb a mountain. Then a colleague suggested he use Tetris. It's one of the most popular games ever. Players must stack various falling pieces into straight lines. Anyone who has played it knows that even in your sleep, you can't stop sorting the pieces. Stickgold assembled a group of students that included those who had never played Tetris and those who had spent more than 50 hours playing it. During the study, the professor allowed the participants to take a nap in a sleep research lab. He woke them up and asked them what they had dreamed about. 3 out of 5 answered that they had seen the pieces in Tetris falling down. In the dream, their brains replayed the task they had worked on during the day, just as Stickgold recreated the sensation of climbing a mountain after spending a day in Vermont. On the second night of the experiment, more participants dreamed about Tetris. It seems that the mind decided to devote more time to strategizing once it realized that it was seriously required to choose the correct position of the pieces. All participants who played Tetris for the first time reported dreaming about falling pieces, while only half of the experts had similar dreams. Interestingly, Stickgold involved in the study several people who had recurrent bouts of amnesia. They also reported seeing falling pieces in their dreams, although they didn't remember playing Tetris. So each person's mind used sleep to process the day's experiences. Dreaming about Tetris helped participants improve their scores when they played the game a second time. Other studies have shown the same thing. Researchers from Brazil used the violent computer game Doom instead of Tetris. Participants in the experiment destroyed zombies and monsters with assault rifles, knives, and chainsaws for an hour before bedtime. When they were awakened in the middle of a rapid eye movement phase and asked to talk about their dreams, almost all mentioned monsters and chainsaws. As in the case of Tetris, those who dreamed about the game performed better at it the next day than those who did not relive it in their dreams. Stickgold decided to continue his research. Thanks to his experiment with Tetris, he managed to convince the Harvard administration to buy the game Alpine Racer 2 and install it on the computers in his sleep lab. This arcade required a person to move their entire body, not just their thumbs. The player had to stand on two platforms that represented skis and firmly grasp two movable handles that replaced the ski poles. Participants in the experiment had to move their arms and legs at the same time, dodging trees and passing gates on a course that closely resembled the Black Diamond in Colorado. This activity was like climbing a mountain in Vermont or another complex activity that requires simultaneous decision-making and exercise. A difficult cognitive process that takes a lot of time and patience to achieve mastery. Stickgold decided in his study to find out whether people dream about new information overnight and how it interacts with what the brain already knows. Like the Tetris experiment, Stickgold had volunteers play Alpine Racer 2 for 45 minutes and then go to bed in his lab. But this time, he decided to wait until the subjects had completed 1 or 2 sleep cycles lasting an hour and a half before waking them up and asking them about their dreams. As in the experiment with Tetris, almost half of those who were awakened at the beginning of the night saw dreams based on the game, how they are skiing or climbing a mountain. But the further away they went, the dreams became less straightforward. They were already dreaming about moving quickly through the forest, as if they were on a conveyor belt. The literal reproduction of new information gradually became analytical. As soon as the initial phase of sleep passes, the brain begins to find connections and associations with data from our internal memory map. The stage of sleep in which skiing penetrates the realm of long-known information usually begins late at night, when the rapid eye movement phase is longer. While a person is asleep, the brain starts a stream of consciousness and desperately searches for any connections. This explains why we remember such strange dreams after waking up and how fresh ideas emerge thanks to our memory. The interplay of emotions, facts, and new information allows us to look at a subject from an unexpected angle. Building on Stickgold's research, Matthew Walker decided to find out how sleep affects neuroplasticity, a neurological term referring to the process of changing neural connections in the brain when remembering something or learning a new skill. Walker had just received his degree from Harvard at the time. While at Berkeley, Walker asked several right-handed people to type 5 digits with their left hands. This was a non-standardized task. It was unlikely that participants had performed it before, hence the results were unbiased. After analyzing the time it took people to press the keys, Walker realized almost all of them subconsciously divided a 5-digit number into several digits that were easier to type. By the same token, the Social Security number is divided into several 3- to 4-digit numbers to make it easier to remember. If you try saying the number out loud, you will notice that you divide it into rhythmic groups. Participants in the experiment came to Walker a second time already after they had slept. As in Stickgold's research, their performance improved markedly after sleep. After sleeping for 8 hours, people were able to type 5 digits in one smooth motion. However, not all sleep is equally productive for the brain. The timing makes a big difference. As Walker discovered, it all depends on the quality of sleep a person is immersed in immediately after learning something new. The most significant time for learning is the first 6 hours of sleep. In one study, scientists showed subjects how to perform a motor skills test. One group was woken up after less than 6 hours and asked to complete the tasks. The second group slept for 8 hours. They completed the motor skills test 21% faster than the previous day. And those who were awakened during the night improved only 9%. It seems that waking up caused their brains to stop doing the necessary work at a crucial time. Stickgold conducted another interesting test that confirmed that the brain functions completely differently when it comes to creative memory work during the dreaming phase of REM sleep. Stickgold measured how these associative networks of information functioned in 3 cases: just during the day, while awake, when waking up from non-REM sleep, and when waking up from REM sleep. When you awaken the brain from non-REM sleep or measure its functioning during the day, the principles of brain activity are closely and logically connected. However, when you awaken the brain during REM sleep, the algorithm of actions is completely different. The hierarchy of logical associative connections disappeared as well. The brain in REM sleep was not interested in banal, common-sense connections and step-by-step associations. Instead, it bypassed obvious connections, preferring to use concepts with a low degree of relatedness. During the dreaming phase of REM sleep, the guards of logic completely forgot about their service. The results showed that this kind of brain activity can produce anything, and the fancier it is, the better. These experiments revealed how radically different the principles of brain activity are during dreaming compared to any other period. When we enter the stage of REM sleep and a dream occurs, memory blocks begin to mix, and in this state, we are no longer constrained to see the most typical and obvious connections between units of information. On the contrary, the brain is actively inclined to ferret out the most remote and obscure conjunctions between situations in its experience. This is why dreams are so absurd and variable. This is why, for Feynman, playing billiards in dreams could be associated with trying to build relationships with different girls. While awake, turning to your memory lofts, it is as if you are looking at the stars through the wrong side of a telescope. By doing so, you get a hyper-focused narrow vision that can in no way encompass the informational cosmos offered by the brain. While awake, we notice only a small fraction of the possible interconnections of memory. But when we enter the dream state in sleep, the picture is reversed. Now we are looking through the telescope through its right end, thus looking through the vast layers of our memory. And looking at the constellations of stored information in its entirety, we are able to notice its various combinations. It is sleep that builds connections between distantly related information elements that are not visible in the light of daytime wakefulness. This is the difference between knowledge, retaining individual facts, and wisdom, understanding what they mean put together, or, simply put, memorization versus understanding. REM sleep allows our brains to go beyond the former and truly master the latter. Thus, an experienced physician, seemingly intuitively making an accurate diagnosis, actually draws on the many symptomatic subtleties he or she observes in a patient. This type of ability to generalize comes only with years of experience, but it is also a kind of extract of the REM effect. Children deriving complex grammatical structures in a language not yet mastered can also serve as an excellent example. Even a 1.5-year-old baby can form a very complex phrase if he sleeps after hearing something similar for the first time. Perhaps the most striking evidence for the existence of dream-generated insight comes from an experiment conducted by Dr. Ulrich Wagner. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers from the University of Lübeck in northern Germany decided to test this theory in a laboratory setting. They hoped to find an answer to the question whether sleep promotes the birth of new ideas or whether insight depends on the amount of time spent looking for a solution. They gathered a group of volunteers and asked them to solve a math puzzle. The researchers explained that 2 rules had to be followed to get a 6-digit number in the answer, and participants were not required to have any special math skills other than subtraction. First, they had to look at the ratios of the 6 pairs of numbers in the number chain. If there were 2 4s in a row, the correct answer was this number. If the numbers were different, you had to subtract the other from 1. What the researchers didn't tell the volunteers was that the answer could have been much simpler. In each example, the last 3 digits of the answer mirrored the first 3. In other words, if the first part of the answer was 491, the second part was 194. None of the subjects noticed this tricky pattern during training, even after solving 30 problems. When the subjects learned the general rules, the researchers divided them into groups according to how many hours each of them would sleep. The first group had to sleep the standard 8 hours, and the second group had to stay awake all night. Participants in the third group practiced solving the problems in the morning and were asked to come back 8 hours later and were not allowed to nap during the day. Thus, all groups returned to the task after the same amount of time. If they all do the task more or less equally, then the brain just needs to be given time to think to find the right solution. If the results are different, it means that there is something going on in the dream that causes us to react differently to new tasks. The results of the study showed sleep plays a key role. Test subjects who did not sleep before the second attempt at solving problems coped a little better than the first time. And those who slept 8 hours solved the task 17% faster. But that's not all. Participants who found the hidden, easy solution completed each example 70% faster than the others because they only had to figure out the first 3 digits of the 6-digit answer. In the groups that stayed awake, only 1 in 4 solved the pattern, while of those who slept, almost everyone eventually found the quick solution. At some point during the night, their minds were able to reevaluate the task they had been working on during the day. The awake participants viewed each example literally, following exactly the instructions the research team had given them. Meanwhile, sleep promoted cognitive flexibility in thinking, causing the subjects to look at the task in a new way. It was as if sleep tensed the thinking muscles, and in response, a new perception of reality emerged in the brain. The study confirmed that sleep promotes problem solving. Some would say, what about the great minds who slept very little, yet demonstrated great creative ability? Thomas Edison, for example, slept only a few hours a night, and yet he had 1,093 patents in the United States alone, and about 3,000 in the rest of the world. Edison prided himself on maintaining an incredible capacity for work, averaging only about 4 hours of sleep a night. He looked down on people who loved to sleep and thought they were wasting precious time of their lives. In this case, almost the strongest catalyst for the inventor's genius was sleep, albeit not quite full-fledged. First, he allegedly slept only a few hours a day. We will never know the truth of whether he really slept as little as some claim, including, incidentally, himself. But still, 4,000 patents. How? What is known for certain is that Edison had a habit of taking naps during the day. He recognized the creative potential of dreams and ruthlessly exploited this tool, describing it as a break from genius. Edison had noticed that whenever he was drawn to bed, startling ideas were floating around in his head, and unless he was able to rouse himself in time, they were forgotten by the time he awoke. Something like this has probably noticed each of us more than once. The borderline state between wakefulness and sleep is called hypnagogia, and it is indeed famous for producing unexpected creative insights. Edison is said to be seated in a chair near his desk. On the chair he placed a notebook and pen. Under the right armrest of the chair on the floor was a metal skillet. Clasping a few bearings in his right hand, Edison let sleep completely consume him. As soon as he began to dream, his muscle tone would relax, and he would release the balls, which would fall onto the pan and wake him up. Then Edison would write down all the creative ideas that filled his brain while dreaming. Genius, wasn't it? The strange pattern of behavior proved contagious, and Edison's example was followed by other geniuses of that remarkable era, Albert Einstein and Salvador Dali. The latter used a heavy wrench instead of bearings. It may be recalled that the most famous paintings of this artist are devoted to sleep, including Dream Caused by the Flight of a Bee Around a Pomegranate, a second before awakening, and the disintegration of the persistence of memory. Given the potential that the state called dreaming holds, it is not surprising that the author of the book makes such a claim, a statement that people who can control their dreams are some new stage of evolution. Matthew Walker writes, perhaps in the not-too-distant future, such people will constitute a special cohort that will be able to solve many creative problems and meet the challenges facing humanity. No, people go into conscious dreams to have fun, not to solve super problems. But even if you're not brilliant enough to control your dreams, just watch them. Because we are all geniuses when we dream. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to sponsors. If you want to support my channel, put a like and subscribe.